Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. I'm Asbed Bedrossian, and along with Hovik Manucharyan, this week we're going to talk about the following major topics: Armenia-Russia relations and the new Cold War, a phrase used by Mikhail Gorbachev to describe renewed US-Russia tensions in 2014, Iran-Russia and Iran-Armenia relations, election politics and the latest MPG polls, and Serge Sargsyan's interview.
And to talk about these issues, we have with us Manucharyan, no relation, president of the Civic Forum NGO. Her areas of focus include Artsakh, the Armenian Armed Forces, national security, and foreign policy. And Dr. Pietro Shakarian, a Cleveland-based historian of Russia and the Soviet Union, with a focus on Soviet Armenia and the Caucasus during the era of Nikita Khrushchev's thaw. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Good evening.
Pietro, I don't recall seeing the doctor in front of your name in December. So tell us what's been going on here.
Yeah, well, this is new, Hovik. I just successfully defended my PhD dissertation.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I'm going to be conferred my degree from Ohio State in a week, next week, as a matter of fact. And as you may recall, my topic of research was on Asbed Bedrossian and his reforms in the nationality sphere, his role in de-Stalinization, including de-Stalinization in Armenia. And if you want to check out more, we had an earlier Groong podcast, I believe, on this subject.
Yeah,
so,
it was back in December, so I would urge our listeners to check that out.
It's on our YouTube channel, yes.
Okay, yes, and all the other channels that we have. So congratulations, Dr. Shakarian. We look forward to your contributions to human scholarship, education, and insight for years to come. Thank you.
Congratulations, Pietro.
Yeah. So on to our first topic of Armenia and Russia relations and the quote-unquote new Cold War. I wanted to begin with trying to understand Nikol Pashinyan's relationship with Moscow. There have been several instances of bizarre public statements and behavior by Pashinyan that cast doubt on his relationship with Moscow. We all remember the story about the Iskanders, the prisoners of war who didn't arrive, and then Moscow was blamed for them, etc. And then most recently, according to leaked audio from Pashinyan's private meeting with Armenian lawyers in Moscow, I believe that was earlier in April, he said that peace until September 2020 existed only because it served Russia's interests, hinting at the fact that war then started because now it was in the interest of Moscow. Or at least that's a takeaway that many people took from that. Pietro, recently Pashinyan said that relations with Russia are, and will be good with Russia, but is everything really rosy with Putin there?
No, I don't think that they are, and I've long, believed this. Even when there were some commentators who were saying that, in the aftermath of the deal, it maybe suits Putin to have Pashinyan there. The reality is that the Kremlin leadership, even from day one, was never too enthusiastic about Pashinyan, especially with all the moves he was doing, in particular prosecuting former authorities in Armenia, and just in general kind of his flirtations with the West and all sorts of other issues. We've discussed this in earlier podcasts, but in general, they've never been too enthusiastic about Pashinyan from day one. So that relationship has never been, ideal, to put it mildly. And also, as we know, there were several members of his administration who were very pro-Western and anti-Russian. And they had long kind of sought to kind of influence him to take an even more overt anti-Russian stance, so to speak. So no, the relationship has never been terribly good. And I think that these statements just kind of unmask what was already there, so to speak.
That's interesting. One would not think that, interpersonal relations should be mixed with relations based on the interests of the countries. So I wanted to ask, Marine, are Pashinyan's relationships with Moscow indicative of the overall Armenian relations? I mean, they can't be too disparate, can they?
Pashinyan never had the chance, he didn't have too many chances in the past to build up some, these core relationships with the Russians as such. So he did have very few of those chances. And I think as a personality, he did fail in terms of, being able to have these ties or be predictable or trusted by the Russians. And he's very, after coming to power, we've all seen how dramatically and drastically he failed in terms of making sure that the Russians accept and understand him as a person or as a leader. He was very unpredictable. He still is unpredictable, and he was trying to actually, build up this relationship on a very shady, let's say, on a non-fundamental in a not very good way. I don't think it's indicative to Armenia-Russia relationship. It's more of a Pashinyan-Russia relationship and Pashinyan team Russia relationship, because these are like group of people who are not trusted by the Russians, and full stop. So that's why in Armenia there is this intrigue between Kocharyan and Pashinyan teams, one being trusted, one not being trusted, and also very important for Russians, being predictable as a matter of fact.
We talked about Biden's recognition of the Armenian genocide last week, and in the aftermath, there have been differing interpretations on the significance of that step, especially when it comes to geopolitics. Some see it purely in terms of U.S. settling scores with Turkey. Others, such as several pro-Western political forces in Armenia, see it as a sign of Washington's intentions to re-engage in the region. For instance, a fringe opposition group, the Armenian National Pole, the Azgain Ժողովրդական Bever, was out on the streets singing the American national anthem. The news of the recognition was followed by a bizarre interview that U.S. Ambassador Lynn Tracy gave to Azatutsun, where she refused to use the word genocide again throughout the entire interview. Marina, did you have a chance to hear Tracy's interview, and what are your impressions?
I did not follow the subject closely because for me it was a genocide fuzz around the geopolitical issues that are going on. So I didn't go deep into the noise around it. That's why I missed that interview probably. So sorry, I can't say much about it.
Yeah, she said several things where people spun it different ways. Like she also said, like when Haray Tamrazian asked her, several times, can you please give us weapons and so forth? She said that, Armenia's membership in the CSTO precludes or severely limits that cooperation, even though we know that United States provides Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan,
yes,
and even Azerbaijan, even though they call it not military aid, they call it some kind of like counterterrorism operation. But still, it's significant U.S. Investment or U.S. aid in that region, and a lot of people spun it in a way that, see, if we leave the CSTO, then the U.S. will provide us all the aid that we need.
Oh, it's actually interesting to see that people are not spanning it towards the direction that you see that the U.S. is not about genocide, is about completely different things, and it's not about CSTO. Yeah. It's actually about the U.S. interest in the region and the fact what is happening around Sunni area, and also Iran and China being engaged as well. So I think it's very primitive of our society to look into it from such a
purely humanitarian.
It's like purely humanitarian intervention.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's what people resonates with most people, I think. Pietro, so according to Emil Sanamian, who is a regular guest of ours, the U.S. is on a path of withdrawal from the region, and we can sort of not expect anything from the U.S. in terms of our geopolitical partnership or draw any strength from that. Do you agree with this assessment?
I think he's partially correct. I mean, there is kind of a move to withdraw from the region, but I would caution against thinking that the U.S. is going to pull out of the region completely. So if we're talking about somebody like Tulsi Gabbard or the retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor, if they were in charge of U.S. foreign policy, then maybe we would see a truly kind of anti-interventionist policy. But the reality is that the U.S. war party and the military-industrial complex, which President Eisenhower warned against in his farewell address in 1961, they still dominate the U.S. foreign policy establishment. But at the same time, with these domestic pressures you have in the U.S., like BLM, like COVID, like the economic inequalities, Washington is increasingly under pressure to come home. I mean, we have this idea of George McGovern's phrase, come home America. Well, that's kind of the idea. We see a little bit already with Afghanistan, with Biden saying he's going to kind of pull out or pull back from Afghanistan. And as we know, the forever wars are very unpopular with the American public. However, U.S. military spending remains massive, and U.S. foreign policy elites remain focused on confronting Russia and China. It's all over the news. It's all over the media. And these are two countries, of course, with significant nuclear arsenals. On top of that, I'm not sure we're going to see a dialing down of the U.S.'s confrontational stance toward Russia, because in January this year, in Foreign Affairs, which is our most influential U.S. foreign policy publication, Michael McFaul, who was the former U.S. ambassador to Russia under Obama, basically was calling on the Biden administration to contain Putin, to launch an all-out containment strategy that would involve beefing up support to several post-Soviet countries, including, and this is the order in which he listed them, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, and Uzbekistan. And in addition, he also called for overthrowing Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus and imposing more sanctions on Moscow, which the United States government actually did just a few weeks ago. So you had that. Also, just days really after the statement on Karabakh was signed by Pashinyan, Aliyev, and Putin, there was an op-ed by Ben Hodges in the EU Observer. Ben Hodges, the retired U.S. Lieutenant General, basically wrote that the U.S. should beef up its presence in the Caucasus, restore relations with Turkey, and immediately admit Georgia into NATO, and basically kind of create a lasting U.S. military presence in Georgia, right? And so this was, like I said, in response to the presence of Russian troops in Karabakh. So this shows you kind of where everything is going. Now, Pashinyan, it's not just even the fringe parties. I believe actually Pashinyan hopes that Biden will provide certain support. This explains why he has such weird, bizarre statements toward the Russians, because he doesn't fully trust them, I don't believe.
I remember that,
and as Marina said, yeah.
There was some talk that the war, in fact, lasted as long as it did because Armenia was holding out until the last minute in hopes that the change in power in Washington would somehow influence the U.S. to be more active and in Armenia's favor during the somehow change the course of the war. Is there any truth to that,
Yeah.
Marina? What do you think?
That makes me laugh. No, I mean, I think my opinion was elaborated a number of times about this. It's one thing when you expect another power change in another country to intervene, and it's another thing how you handle the entire war in your own country. And with so many bizarre statements coming out of the Armenian government about the, what the general chiefs of staff said, what they didn't, and all that, fuzz around the declassifying information that they had from the meetings, or Nicole stating that he was not a commander-in-chief, but rather a moderator between generals. So with all this is really, I don't know, it's not even serious to say that Pashinyan was anyhow waiting for Americans to, change the power, bring Biden into the office, and some miracles would happen with the way Armenia handled the war itself.
I also want to add something else too, that actually I was talking with Harat Mikhailian about this. He was thinking that there was a significant strain in the Pashinyan administration that actually believed that Biden would support Armenia if he won. And actually this was reflected in some way by Pashinyan's very kind of elaborate congratulatory note to Joe Biden right after he won. So there is kind of the sentiment, and if Pashinyan is harboring those sentiments, that the West is going to help us, that the Americans are going to help us, this again echoes exactly the mistakes that the leaders of the first Armenian Republic made in 1918 to 1920. So I can't believe this. You have an Armenian leader who should be learning the lessons from the history, and he's not.
Yeah, but that's assuming that he is actually aware of the Armenian history, or he is actually knowledgeable about all this. And also, we do believe that it's like diplomacy 101. Like, he has the Armenian ambassador to US, who is not getting the directions he's supposed to get. He's appointing and sending mixed messages who is going to appoint next ambassador to United States, like some amateur group of people that they think if they just come out on the stage and make some sort of statements, then that will, get the game going. But it's not how it works. I mean, you guys are very well aware how things work in Washington, D.C. It's not like Biden sits and watches his lives,
Yeah, and in fact, these news about upcoming appointment of Malkuns, they have been going on for months. And
Yeah.
I think that, even if you were going to do it, you would do it quickly, right? Right now there's this uncertainty whether Nersesyan is going to remain as the ambassador, and I think that's not undermining his credibility in Washington as well.
And of course, Biden did win, and what happened to the war? There was no effect on the war.
No,
Nothing is about to change this
Exactly.
fast.
Exactly,
anyway.
right? Even if he did win, and you would assume that several months, so January plus several months, would Armenia be able to hold off, Azerbaijan for 6 months until Biden finally decides to act, even assuming like all the fantasies that this is true?
I mean, there were already interference from Russia on October 18, and they even failed to accept that interference with
Right.
much better terms than they did accept in the end of the day on November 9th. So I don't know if we're talking about serious people or we're just
So,
talking
so, so
about
in general, I
Pashinyan
think
and the
that
clown.
this counting on U.S. support is a fool's gold. I think we all agree here.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
No, you can count to any support as long as you're actually doing your homework better and you're preparing the infrastructure for any sort of support. He thinks that it's a matter of statements and pleasing people, like just like he went to Russia and said our favorite show is May 9th parade. Now we ended up 3 years later having a May 9th parade in Stepanakert done by the Russian military presence there, not our own armed
Oof.
forces, for
Yeah.
Christ's sake. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
The
yeah.
other thing too, I also wanted to add about this is that the statement, I think, in some ways, is indicative of kind of Turkey losing its trust both in Washington and in Moscow. So Turkey, to some extent, it has maybe these disagreements with the United States in the Middle East, and then you have this impact of this genocide recognition, which is to send a message to Erdogan. Then Erdogan thinks he can turn to Putin. Well, in addition to his interference in the Karabakh issue, there was also his support for Zelensky in Ukraine. Sending him Bayraktar drones, kind of encouraging him. And Zelensky actually was originally like the peace candidate in Ukraine. But he's losing popularity and he's looking for friends. And so this is kind of like, I guess you could call it like a marriage of convenience, where Erdogan is kind of helping him or kind of encouraging him maybe to retake the parts of Donbass that are rebel held Donbass. So that too is another dimension in all this as well.
Interesting.
Well,
Yeah,
also, selling his military hardware doesn't hurt the economy.
and actually, it's Turkish way of dealing. If you look at their behavioral pattern, it's like they can gain this kind of friends against Russia. They might not help them all the way till the end. They might not end up, helping them militarily just after selling the military equipment. But they can sell it to Russians as, using it as a bargaining chip in the end. Like they don't
Right.
need to go all the way back. And this is how Turkey was doing during the past decade, at least with Erdogan. Like they don't have to push all the way, but they can always sell it and say, okay, we don't need it, but you have to give us something in return. So this is the way they dealt, and that worked. So if the Armenian government was smart enough, they could have done that too.
Well,
But,
and you
we
have to
know
have
it
something in
didn't
your
work.
hand to trade with, right? So unlike Erdogan, I think Armenia in general and Pashinyan, have very little to give or take. So they have to, I think, be mindful of their weight class. But all right, let's move on real quick. So Azerbaijan's possible membership in the EAEU. So this past week, the Eurasian Union, or EAEU, representatives gathered for a summit meeting in Kazan on April 29. We learned that Azerbaijan did not participate in this summit, as had been hinted in the press for some weeks that they might be there as observers. This was reported as the first political step to eventual membership in the organization. Analysts indicated that Azerbaijan's participation hinged on Armenia's approval because it's a consensus-based organization, and Armenian officials a week prior to the event indicated that they were, considering whether to allow Baku's participation, and effectively it appears that Armenia has vetoed Baku's participation this time. It's natural to assume that Moscow would want Azerbaijan to join the EAU, and in fact, some calculate that's the reason for Moscow being less than forthcoming in their support in Artsakh, if that's truly what happened. Some say that Moscow did provide as much support as it was obligated to. But anyway, but does Baku really want or need membership in the EAU? Marine, in your opinion, why did Baku not participate in the meeting in Kazan on April 29? And do they want to?
The fact that Azerbaijan, this entire thing was going around Russia gaining Azerbaijan back and getting them into this EAU thing was clear quite long time, probably since the 2016 April war. However, why they didn't participate in the Kazan, some speculations are because Armenia demanded it and they demanded the PO release. And if that doesn't happen, then Armenia will not allow Azerbaijan participating in it. So I don't know whether this is true or not. However, if they did it, then good for them. At least some sort of a bold movement. And this is the bargaining chip I was talking about. Like if they're able to actually stand up for themselves, then probably good for them. However, now I'm more skeptical about Azerbaijan becoming an EU member because they're in a better place now than considering 3 years ago. And they're in a victorious place, and they're a place where everybody wants to get in. The Turks want, the Chinese and Iranians are kind of cutting deals, so they're pushing out Russia. So why bother actually to joining an EU union when actually you can try to see what else on the menu, let's say.
Yeah.
So I think Azerbaijan will take its time and will consider carefully how things are going. On the other hand, the situation inside Azerbaijan is also changing. So the public started understanding that this was not a pure victory as they are praising and talking about. So the things are getting a bit closer to get to the escalation in
And I
there
don't know
as
if this
well.
is I don't know if this is posturing or there's some more behind it. There have been public overtures between Baku and Ankara, and I believe there were some rumors of a union between Azerbaijan and Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? And is that sort of being brought up to as a counterweight and trying to bargain to get more from Russia, or is that actually how things might end up?
It can be very well become a bargaining chip with Russians, or it can become a union. They've been talking about, two state, one nation union for years. And for now, I think it's for them, why not, is one of the best chances. And considering the clouds gathering over Sunik region of Armenia, and also recent days statements by the Aliyev about Sunik, and about today's statement about Azeri forces going to Stepanakert in June. So all these are quite worrisome, and I don't know what else this government actually agreed upon with our neighbors and Russians as well. So this is about, I don't know, like things are gonna escalate towards June as well, towards the elections. So I don't know whether it's gonna be after 20th of June, because if it was before, I don't think Pashinyan would make such a stupid mistake announcing elections after what he agreed upon, like after the deadlines of what he agreed upon. So I think after June 20th, we will have very serious tectonic movements as well happening in the region that he was keeping silence
Okay.
about. It's just knowing him personally makes me expect the worst as possible. He will hold the worst news for the end of the so that we don't expect it at all.
Pietro, going back to the EU question, what changes if Azerbaijan were to be admitted to the Eurasian Economic Union? What's in it for Baku, Moscow, as well as for Armenia, either on the up or down sides?
Well, I think, Hovik, the problem is it's way too early to talk about this idea of Azerbaijan joining the same political union as Armenia, because they just came off again of this really nasty war, and the tension is still very much there. I mean, you saw Azerbaijan's mistreatment of Armenian POWs. You saw, the hate rhetoric continues. And so, in order for there to be a cohesive union, including an economic union, which could be beneficial. I mean, we saw in the Soviet times, Armenia and Azerbaijan, there were, open borders, people were trading, more or less there was normal relations. But in this environment, after all these years of Aliyev stoking kind of this hatred against Armenians, and especially after this war, it's very difficult to just, do something like this. This is a process that takes years to accomplish.
Okay.
So the idea that, I mean, I think that, there are economic benefits, to cooperating with Azerbaijan, but in the right conditions. Right now, the conditions don't exist.
I disagree a little bit. Can I
Okay.
say why? I slightly disagree because it's not Armenia's union, it's Russia's union. So the Russians are gonna push for it, and they need a market, they need Azerbaijani market, and they don't care whether we love each other or not. The hatred towards Armenians is more of
No.
a restraining tool for actually holding on Armenia, so that we will never talk again about releasing our territories or fighting for our homeland or bringing back Nagorno-Karabakh, independently or out of Azerbaijan. So I think this is not about Armenia and Azerbaijan at all. They can accept Azerbaijan. And it's a matter of, the question is whether Armenia will have enough strength to say no to or put a veto against the Azerbaijani membership to the EAEU. Otherwise, there would be no other obstacles. Russians will be absolutely fine, and they won't care whether they hate us or we can live together or not. After all, in the 1920s, like Armenian and Azerbaijani countries joined the Soviet Union already with territorial disputes and splitting the countries and becoming members of the same union. So I think they will push for it as much as they can. Russians need Azeris in that union.
I think that the historical context of the 20s versus today is different context. And I think that if we are to have any kind of union where Moscow is at the center, it undermines Russia's security interests to have two countries that there's so much dispute and so much animosity between in the same union that I think for Moscow it's destabilizing. They can't just,
but
put
we don't
force.
have an army anymore.
Well, but I'm not sure how that.
We don't have an army anymore.
It doesn't.
And if they don't get Azerbaijan, they're out of Caucasus. Like, it's a matter of a year or two for Russia to be completely out of this region. And this is something they do understand, I hope at least, because if they don't, then everybody's screwed. But Iran, China, and Turkey are literally going to split this region so nicely that Russians will be completely out of it within a matter of time. So maybe in 5 years, when the term of the peacekeepers will be solved, they will be just out of it. Or they will have a Fourth World War.
Speaking of Iran, let's go to the next topic. On the matter of Iran and Russia, or regional geopolitics, earlier this week, news from Iran shook the geopolitical world, putting into doubt that everything is rosy between Iran and Russia. Javad Zarif, Iran's foreign minister, in a leaked audio interview, lamented the fact that Iran's Revolutionary Guard, specifically General Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated by US in January 2020, working with Russia, actively interfered in Iran's foreign relations, impeding Iran's efforts to reach a nuclear deal with world powers. Now, this seems significant because, if a nuclear deal happened, there may be completely different dynamics. The interview was not supposed to be published until after the Iranian elections in June, but was leaked ahead of time to the Iranian press in the West. Pietro, do you think the leak was intentional? If so, what were the motivations of the leakers, and what's the significance of this development in the context of regional geopolitics?
Well, I think that the leak was an internal affair. I think that there's the possibility that this could have been an internal affair to undermine Zarif, to undermine conservatives within Iran. So we have the conservative camp, the radical camp within Iran, but I think that this, may have been intended to undermine Zarif, and I think also it could be intended to. What it does de facto is actually it does undermine Iranian-Russian relations. It shows that the whole situation is much more complicated than what people might assume. Now we know there's a history of that Russian-Iranian relations haven't been perfect over the centuries. So go back to the 1820s. One of the reasons why we even have an Armenian state today is the result of the Treaty of Turkmenchai. So going back to that war, Iranians to this day, that those concessions in the Caucasus region, that still has a bad taste for many Iranians. You mentioned Turkmenchai today; they still, resent that. There was also the post-World War II Iran crisis. So there's been tension throughout the history, but pretty consistently in recent decades, the relationship between Iran and Russia has been very good, and especially on issues like cooperation in Syria. But now this really kind of throws, the relationship into question and, challenges it. I think at the end of the day, the relationship is strong enough that it can withstand this, but it shows that the situation is much more complex than one might assume looking from the outside.
But Pietro, I think it's worth reminding that this was not a sort of a wiretap. This was an interview that Javad Zarif gave to a journalist with the agreement that it was not going to be published until after the election. So, if someone didn't leak it now,
it would have been eventually leaked, yeah.
The natural course of events developed, and it would only be published in June after the elections. It would still hurt Moscow's relations with Iran. So, is it really an attempt to undermine Russo-Iranian relations, or essentially pull the carpet under one of the political forces in Iran, or was it maybe even a calculated move? Marina, let me ask you: do you have any thoughts on who may have leaked the interview, why, and do you agree that Russia and Iran are strategic allies in general or on balance, And is it possible that their paths may diverge soon?
Well, considering the fact that the conservatives are in power in Iran now, and they were hoping to remain in the power after elections as well, and if this interview was supposed to be published after the elections, so I believe that they did this because they're confident that they have something much better on the stake than the relationship with Russia, or than the Russia relationship is, the relations with Russia is worth sacrificing for that something better. And if we look into the not too far away, recently they did sign a deal with China. So I believe that it has something to do with it. So again, it is mostly the regional aspect of it. In my opinion, I think it's because of the coming to agreement with the Turks about the economic routes that they are developing for transporting Iranian gas towards the Georgia up to the up to the Eastern
Yeah.
Europe, whereas the Turks can have their TANAP. So maybe this is an agreement that they all came together. So that's probably an early warning that came out, organized by the rivals of the conservatives in Iran. This could be one of the speculations that I can try to make, but of course there might be many other details that we are not seeing or missing so far.
So Zarif was going to be one of the leading candidates in the presidential elections in June in Iran. Who is Russia backing in those elections?
I think they should be fine with the ones that they have in power today, at least before Zarif's interview was leaked.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen after that.
I don't think that they had any issue with the Iranian leader. I mean, it seemed like to me, like, I mean, they had ideal relations. But apparently, as we see now, it was much more complicated than, the public appearances would show,
Right.
you know.
And by the way, the Russian troops in Karabakh were being supplied from Iran until recently. So that
Correct.
supplies will be cut off, as I've heard, and they need to think of the other ways of supplying the troops on the ground.
Yeah. And also, I'd say too that the Sunni too. This is also emphasizes its importance, in the region as a part of Armenia that borders Iran, and given Armenia's technically its status, its close relations with Russia, Russia values Armenia holding on to that region. So this is another dimension as well too. When we look at this, Azerbaijani or Turkish designs on Sunik, that Sunik is a very, very critical lifeline to Iran, for Armenia and for Russia by extension.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at this point, Iranians don't care whether Sunni will be Azeri, Turkish, or whoever, as long as they will cut the deal. I don't think they really. I think we give too much importance of thinking that Iranians value Armenian Sunni. I think Iranians will be valuing Sunni no matter whether it's Armenian or Turkish or Azeri, as long as their goods are going there with no problem.
Well, they're not going to have no problems if there's an unbroken Turkish belt forming the northern border of Iran.
Yeah, that's because of NATO. It's not because of Sunni being Armenian. It's because of having technically NATO on the southern border, northern border of their
But
country.
didn't they say that for them, the Armenia's territorial integrity is a red line?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's the reality. I
Yeah,
mean, they
that's
wouldn't want to have a whole Turkic Union on their northern frontier, especially because Azerbaijan is not as reliable an ally for Russia as Armenia is. So I think that for Armenia, if they were to lose Sunni, I think it would be not very good for Iran in the end. I mean, yeah.
Well, under the current situation, without Sunik in Armenian hands, NATO would expand eastward all the way to the Caspian, blocking Russia from the Persian Gulf and cutting Iran off from the Black Sea.
Yeah, it's a very serious threat. I mean, also, if Turkish gets in deep into the Caspian basin, they could penetrate into Central Asia. I mean, there are all sorts of nightmare scenarios. And I
they
think
already put on fire entire frontier of Russia, technically from Tajikistan all the way to Ukraine, is troubles and problems for Russia created as we speak. So,
yeah.
They are already in action. It's just, for me, is more surprising what the hell the Russians are thinking about, because their actions are actually very, non-reasonable, because
I'm
they should have
completely in
been
agreement
more.
with you.
Yeah, like they should have been more, not, I wouldn't say aggressive. Maybe they don't have the power as we think they do, but they really are making very big mistakes, and and we are the ones who are paying the price
So,
at this
Marina,
point.
in the context of Iran relations, you hinted at the deal with China. I just wanted to remind our listeners that China recently committed to invest over 400 billion in Iran over 25 years in exchange for a steady supply of oil. And the deal includes, unlike prior engagements of China in the Middle East, the deal includes a significant military component. This is bound to have geopolitical repercussions, as Marina mentioned. From that perspective, Armenia and Iran had previously announced intentions to build a north-south corridor that would allow Iranian goods and trade to reach Europe through Armenia, then Georgia, and so forth. But to my dismay at least, and to the dismay of many, the project didn't seem to receive a priority. Pietro, why do you think this critical project was delayed in the past? Can Armenia rekindle this project and leverage this north-south corridor as a counterweight to the planned Azerbaijan-Turkey corridor that is being touted by Aliyev and Erdogan, and which is now enshrined in the November 9 capitulation agreement?
I think absolutely they should rekindle it if they're not already thinking along those lines. I mean, for Armenia, that is a lifeline. That north-south corridor is an absolute lifeline. And east-west can be beneficial as well, too, but only on terms, again, that are acceptable to all sides. And I mean really acceptable not only to, the governments, but also to the societies. And right now, as I say, the relations between the societies of Armenia and Azerbaijan are really, not in condition for there to be a genuine realization of a truly cooperative east-west corridor. But in terms of the north-south, yes, absolutely. It's something that should be revisited, and it should be rekindled. And in addition, actually, there was a period where even Georgia was interested in the north-south corridor, that they were actually, seriously exploring this idea. In late 2015, early 2016, Georgia's energy minister, now Tbilisi Mayor Kakakaladze, was actually negotiating with Iran and also with Gazprom on placing Georgia within this corridor. But Azerbaijan was actually very nervous about this because Georgia was not regarding Azerbaijan as a reliable supplier of energy at this moment, and Azerbaijan scrambled to ensure that it was in Georgia's eyes, with the encouragement of the United States, which didn't want to see Russia and Iran enhance their positions in the region as well. So in the end, actually, they were able to offer the Georgians a better deal, and Georgia, abandoned that idea. But again, it reminds us that this whole north, south, east, west, especially north-south corridor is very crucial for the well-being of the region. In the ideal world, we shouldn't be thinking of these corridors as mutually exclusive. Today we do because we think of them in geopolitical terms, but for the whole region, for everybody existing in it, all these corridors are important. But especially, for Armenia, Iran, and Russia, and also Georgia, that north-south corridor is very significant.
Marina, is Russia really, in your opinion, interested in the north-south corridor?
I think Russia is, if they're smart again, they should be interested in anything that is happening in Armenia that will benefit Armenia and will help the country in its existential matters, which is technically having China back to Iran, transporting its goods through Georgia and somewhere else, strengthening the Armenia, and this way Chinese will be benefiting from stopping the Turkish expansion towards east. The Russians will be benefiting having a strong forepost. I don't mind calling Armenia forepost anymore because let's be realistic. So yeah, they should be actually very much interested in it. But again, whether their plans with Caucasus, with South Caucasus, are in line with ours or with Iranian or with Chinese, this one is, I would be having hard time answering, because at this point, looking at their logic, it's really non-predictable, like what exactly they want. Okay, you don't get Azerbaijan, then what do you want? Like what's gonna be next? What is the plan B in case this entire endeavor with getting Azerbaijan into EA?
I think one theory is that there is this group of people in Moscow, and there are different camps in Moscow, and I guess the Gazaviks, as they call them, are afraid of competition with Iran in terms of gas and so forth. So would that explain?
As a short-sighted Gazaviks, then yeah.
All right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They are short-sighted if they don't see the importance of that relationship with Iran, with China, and prioritizing those relations over Turkey, let's say. So.
Or over gas.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Let's quickly jump to Armenian elections, and I know it's exciting, compared with geopolitics. But anyway, so Nikol Pashinyan resigned. Long live Nikol Pashinyan. On Monday, April 25, Nikol Pashinyan resigned. On Monday, May 3, that is tomorrow for us, as we record this podcast, the Armenian parliament is scheduled to hold the first vote in an attempt to elect a new prime minister. Per Pashinyan, there is an agreement between the three parliamentary parties, My Step, Prosperous Armenia, and Bright Armenia, to not nominate a candidate twice in a row, leading to the dissolution of the parliament and snap parliamentary elections. However, in his resignation announcement, Pashinyan said that he intends to remain as acting PM or caretaker prime minister during the interim period. And opposition has criticized this, arguing that Pashinyan has no legal basis to remain as a functioning PM. Marine, in the I wanted to ask you, many in the opposition are still cautious on whether the elections will take place. Some still are in disbelief. Should we actually be more realistic now and say that, yes, the elections are going to happen? And what do you think will happen? Are there any surprises that waiting for us as we head towards elections?
Well, I was actually giggling because one of the supporters of Pashinyan said he has moral right to remain as a, serving or acting prime minister, and that
Yes, and
moral right really made me laugh. But that was Nicola Bagdasaryan, yeah.
Yeah, but that was in response to Pashinyan's own audio in 2018, where he said that after Serge Sargsyan's resignation, no one can be prime minister. Sort of on the same point, he had different.
Yeah.
So that was funny.
Yeah, I mean it's ironic. But yeah, so the situation in the country remains as it is. Of course, those who do not trust Pashinyan and have very strong grounds for that believe that elections, I mean, we won't believe it until it happens, actually, because it's Pashinyan. On the other hand, I'm very skeptical when it comes to it's going to happen or it's not going to happen, or whether what's going to be the result, and speculate on it. Because to be honest, whatever changes right now will not bring, and this is coming from me, it's not going to bring like very big changes to the entire course of the country. Yes, it might get, in case Kocharyan wins the elections, which I'm very skeptical about, it might bring some sort of stability and predictability with Russians. But yet again, the overall course of the country will not depend from the internal government of this country. So it's going to be always depending on what is happening geopolitically, what is happening between West and East, and Russians and Iranians. So we will going to be dealing with whatever is at stake. That's why, for me, these elections are more of a letting out this steam that was collected after the war, the defeat, and the losing of the territories. I am also one of the people that is skeptical about elections happening or not. I believe that all the other parties should not participate, and they should actually boycott it the very last minute, so that leaving Pashinyan with his team to run these elections and run their own show.
Okay.
But however, it's interesting to follow the processes. Like especially for me, is interesting to see the clash of titans in a way. Serge Sargsyan's recent interview and
which
his
we'll cover,
remarks about the things that happened back in 2018.
Pietro, do you agree that the opposition should have all been unified around boycotting the elections?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that the thing is, with this election, I don't necessarily think I'm skeptical about it being actually a fair election, because Pashinyan, already he's doing very kind of sneaky moves by staying on in the interim. He's not really even resigning, and we know he's going to use administrative resources to his advantage to get reelected, and that's what the opposition, is looking at. They're looking at that this is going to be a rigged game from the outset, and he's going to try and do everything he can, to win. Also use the information sphere too. So the opposition, they're right to be skeptical.
Right.
Because is it from the outset? Is it going to be a fair contest? Is it going to be a free and fair election by this quote unquote democratic leader? Yeah. Everybody was saying, how Pashinyan is this wonderful democratic leader. He's not democratic. And, you see his whole record is anti-democratic.
And the parliament is busy passing laws left and right around regulating freedom of speech during elections. I think last week they passed a law that, raises the penalties for acts of hooliganism, right, especially if it's tied to elections. And I think they now want to outlaw cursing of public officials if it's related to their function as public officials. But you can curse them in private, so this is very ridiculous. But I wanted to switch so just 2 days ago, despite all these misgivings, The latest MPG Gallup poll conducted in the last days of April had some interesting findings. Specifically, it seems that between March and April, March being the last time that the same poll was conducted, Pashinyan's or My Step's rating dropped by 4.5 points from 31.7 to 27.2. And here are some more interesting details. The question was asked if elections were held the following Sunday, which political group would you support? Kocharyan's rating in that same question rose from 5.9% to 8.1%. So there seems to be some interesting dynamics there. The remaining parties, Prosperous Armenia, Bright Armenia, Republican Party, and the ARF, which all had less than 5% previously, their rating dropped even further this month. Another thing worth mentioning, and I'll ask you then the question, is there were differences between regions. In Yerevan, My Step enjoyed only 22.5% popularity, which is in stark contrast to the villages where they get 34.9%. And this is, I guess, this is where the administrative resources part may come in. But likewise, Kocharyan enjoys a popularity of 11.5% in Yerevan and only 4.7% in villages. This drop in ratings for Pashinyan happened despite the fact that he effectively had an unofficial head start on the campaigning. You know, we've seen him visiting regions, giving speeches and so forth. Marine, do you think that this trend will continue? I think you previously said that you don't have much hopes in these elections, but anything surprising that you've heard so far in these polls?
Actually, no, the polls are, I would say they're pretty close to be true in terms of numbers. But let's not forget that Yerevan and Sunik will be the deal breakers. And I also would like to mention that I am very skeptical about generally any polls that are conducted in Armenia because people tend to lie a lot about answering these questions. And I can tell you that like Republican Party support and Kocharyan support are probably the shadow support right now. They do not speak up. A lot of people do not give opinions, but they do have the sympathies towards voting for Kocharyan or for the Republican Party. So I think their numbers are a little higher than they're seen in the charts. It's just because it's not popular to say I am going to vote for Kocharyan because people will be, judging you, and everybody is actually tired of all this process. So generally, yes, I'm skeptical still, and I do agree absolutely about the fact that these elections will not be fair and free. These elections will be rigged. They will use massive administrative resources to be able to actually win at least to the 50 to 60% of votes. That Nikol Pashinyan will literally do anything to achieve this result. Because they do all understand that it's not going to be nice and fluffy for them as soon as they leave the office. So that's why they will do literally everything to win these elections. And I think they will be able to secure it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
If the elections happen. I will always leave this open. If the elections take place, they will be able to secure it.
Unfortunately, regardless of the outcome of the elections, there will be very tough demands on whatever government we come up with to continue with the November 9 agreement.
Of course, yes.
And some will say, I heard Stepan Danielyan, I believe, on Azatutyun talking to Tamrazyan, and he said basically there is a group of very hardline Armenians who do not see, even if they are a minority, let's say, it's going to be difficult to maintain even order, I think, post-elections if Pashinyan somehow gets elected. So I'm wondering about that even, even assuming that, things, there's no violence until the elections end, after the elections, if Pashinyan is still in power, it's going to be very interesting to see how order is maintained.
I give you a lot of credit for still watching Azatutyun and especially Danielian on it, but I'm very skeptical about any violence happening because if things did not escalate and happen until now, like 7 months after the war ended and after Pashinyan remains in power, I don't think anything else will happen if he gets reelected because closer we get to the elections, more he will be manipulating and speculating on people's emotions about previous government, about how much they got rich and everybody's poor because of the previous government. So all this will be it's just going to be the same old songs, and he's going to secure his votes and be reelected. I don't think any violence will happen after that. And unfortunately, the Armenian armed forces, I would expect them to react, or the generals or whoever is out there from the previous war experience or from the previous leadership that was supposed to take certain actions, but they didn't. It's 7 months too late for them to do anything, even after the elections. So I am very skeptical about violence being in place after the elections.
Okay. The other major news this week was the third president of Armenia, Serge Sargsyan, giving an interview. In one or two sentences, both of you, maybe you could sort of give your impressions if you watched the interview. Marina, Pietro, any thoughts?
I didn't have a chance to watch it, unfortunately.
I did watch most of it, and I can say that coming from a person who has been critical of Serge Sargsyan for his entire ruling period, I can say that I am respecting him more and more. And with this interview, he literally called out everyone who went against him during 2018, including Kocharyan, including Karen Karapetyan, including Russians, including Putin. So all this, he actually lined all of them up and pointed at every event that happened and what and how and why Nikol Pashinyan was right and he was wrong and all these statements. So it was very interesting in terms of breaking down to details and recalling the events that happened in 2018. I think his main purpose or his main motivation was to remind every actor in the internal political arena about their sins in the past, so that not to come in as the savers and fresh guys, which is kind of good, because I think if this country wants to move forward, people have to come out clean and confess and be open, because otherwise we will be stuck in the same loop over and over again, the revanchism all over again. So he was trying to pretty much point out at these mistakes that happened in the past. So for me, it was quite a valuable interview to watch. Of course, I also kind of am critical about him not being very honest about their mistakes as well, but that takes probably some time or courage, which they will probably have
Yeah.
at some point in the
In
history.
fact, I
don't
just
know.
want to add one thing. He not only criticized Putin and Kocharyan and the rest, he also said, and maybe this was just to sort of make the pill easy to swallow, he said there are both, he didn't lose to Pashinyan, but to much more powerful forces, both in the north and in the west.
Exactly.
And, we can think of, the civil society folks, who largely backed this revolution or, quote unquote revolution as being the foot soldiers of that revolution. So yes, it seems like everyone's stars aligned against Serge Sargsyan in 2018.
Oh yeah, as I said, it was a parade of planets for Nikol Pashinyan to come to power. It was not his show. It was backed and organized with multiple actors in the play, in the field. So.
There's so much more to talk about, but we'll have to call it a stop for now. Thank you, everyone, and talk to you next week.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all. That concludes our program for this Week in Review episode. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from the previous week. We look forward to your feedback and your suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at groong.org or on our Facebook page ANN-Groong or in our Facebook group Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, like our pages, and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.